The medieval period, often unjustly characterized as intellectually stagnant, actually gave birth to powerful philosophical innovations and a rigorous approach to intellectual inquiry. Scholasticism, which flourished between the 12th and 17th centuries, was intimately tied to the emergence of universities, most notably the University of Paris, which became a fulcrum of thought for countless minds. In this climate, logic became the primary lens through which scholars examined reality, faith, and the very nature of reason itself. William of Sherwood, an English logician and educator, stands at a crucial juncture in the evolution of logic. Though little is known about his early life, his writings, particularly the seminal Introductions in Logicum, bridge the wisdom of ancient philosophers, such as Aristotle, with the challenges and inquiries of medieval scholars. His teachings on terms, propositions, and the structure of arguments fundamentally shaped the intellectual culture of his day and beyond. This book is structured to guide the reader, both scholar and enthusiast alike, through the variegated landscape of medieval logic and the world of William of Sherwood. Each chapter is designed not simply as a repository of facts, but as a narrative exploration, illuminating both the context and the content of Sherwood's work and thought. From the emergence of scholasticism to the bustling intellectual milieu of England and Paris, to the intricacies of syllogisms and medieval argumentation, the chapters delve deeply into historical, philosophical, and biographical dimensions. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button to support the channel. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an audiobook that could change your life. Now let's begin. Enjoy. Chapter 1. The Dawn of Scholastic Thought. The medieval era, stretching roughly from the 5th to the late 15th century, is often misunderstood as a period bereft of intellectual endeavor. Yet within its monasteries, cathedral schools, and burgeoning universities, an intellectual revolution was quietly unfolding. Scholasticism, the defining philosophical pursuit of the High Middle Ages, represented a marriage of faith and reason, of theology and logic, placing the rigorous analysis of concepts at the heart of scholarly enterprise. The roots of scholastic thought lay deep in the transmission of classical wisdom. As the intellectual heritage of Aristotle, Plato, and the Stoics trickled back into the Latin West, often via Arabic translations and commentaries, European scholars began to rediscover and reevaluate the works that would become the bedrock of medieval philosophy. The 12th century Renaissance saw a renewed interest in dialectics, the study of reasoning and argumentation. This intellectual awakening gave rise to an environment ripe for philosophical innovation. Scholasticism's method was meticulous and systematic. It was characterized by the quaestio, a formal question, typically theological or philosophical, posed for rigorous analysis. Opposing arguments, sources from authorities, the sententiae, and rational deductions blended together in the creation of structured debate. Central to scholastic method was the concept of disputation, where masters and students engaged in dialogue, adversarial by design, moving ever closer to refined understanding. Universities, especially those of Paris, Oxford, and Bologna, emerged as focal points for this intellectual energy. These institutions, often aligned with ecclesiastical authorities, became crucibles for philosophical creativity. It was here that the art of logica found fertile ground. Logic became the principal handmaiden of theology, providing scholars with the tools to articulate, defend, and expand upon religious doctrines and philosophical insights with clarity and precision. Within this context, the figure of William of Sherwood begins to emerge. Though not as renowned as Thomas Aquinas or Albertus Magnus, Sherwood's contributions to logic were vital in shaping early scholastic discourse. His focus on terms, propositions, and the rules of reasoning placed him at the forefront of those who sought to systematize human thought. The medieval logicians, Sherwood among them, were heirs to Aristotle's legacy, but sought to adapt, clarify, and advance it to serve the new exigencies of their age. The dawn of scholastic thought thus represents both a rediscovery and a reinvention, a period when logic became the central axis around which all intellectual inquiry revolved. The synthesis of ancient wisdom, religious doctrine, and rational analysis forged a tradition that would endure for centuries, its echoes still discernible in the philosophical curricula of today. William of Sherwood's life and works symbiotically reflect this dawn. His emphasis on rigorous analysis and clear definitions, on the distinction between different types of terms and propositions, and on the necessity of sound reasoning, was emblematic of the scholastic spirit. Through his writings and teachings, Sherwood advanced the discipline of logic, illuminating its path as both a precondition and product of the medieval intellectual awakening. Chapter 2. England in the Age of Intellectual Awakening. In the 13th century, England stood at the crossroads of profound intellectual and social transformation. While much of Europe was invigorated by the scholastic rebirth emanating from Paris and Bologna, England's own universities and cathedral schools emerged as vibrant epicenters of learning, contributing significantly to the broader currents shaping medieval thought. The reigns of monarchs such as Henry II and later Edward now witnessed both political consolidation and the emergence of cultural and academic institutions. The rise of Oxford, and to a lesser extent Cambridge, provided English scholars with the infrastructure to participate in the emerging European conversations about philosophy, theology, and logic. These universities became melting pots, where English tradition fused with the Latin heritage and the resurging intellectual currents imported from the continent. Socio-religious dynamics played a critical role in shaping English intellectualism. The Church was the primary custodian and transmitter of knowledge, overseeing both the education of clergy and the preservation of ancient texts. Cathedrals, monasteries, and collegiate churches functioned not only as centers of worship, but also as places of study, reflection, and writing. English scholars, finding their inspiration in both local traditions and continental advances, developed distinct approaches to logic and dialectic. The influence of international scholars, particularly from Paris, where many English students and teachers studied, was immense. The University of Paris, with its structure of colleges and faculties, served as a model for Oxford and Cambridge. Academic exchanges were common, and texts, often copied by hand in scriptoria, circulated from France, Italy, and Spain to England, infusing English intellectual life with new ideas, methods, and controversies. Within this context, the study of logic took on new significance. The medieval curriculum, structured around the 7 liberal arts, designated logic as central to the trivium: grammar, rhetoric, and logic. English scholars engaged actively in the refinement of logical techniques, contributing commentaries and treatises that would shape subsequent generations. Advanced discussions about syllogisms, fallacies, and the structure of propositions characterized university debates and disputations. England's intellectual awakening was also manifested in its literature, science, and even the law. The introduction and adaptation of Roman law, the crafting of political philosophy, and the translation of philosophical and scientific treatises all speak to an environment of vibrant cross-fertilization between disciplines and traditions. William of Sherwood's formative years unfolded amid this atmosphere of curiosity and scholarly ambition. He would have encountered the great works of Aristotle and Boethius, absorbed the logic promulgated by Peter Abelard and later Roger Bacon, and engaged with the robust debates and disputations that defined academic life. The complex interplay between religious orthodoxy and philosophical innovation offered both constraints and opportunities, a terrain Sherwood navigated with considerable skill. In England, The Age of Intellectual Awakening was not merely the emulation of continental trends. It was, in many respects, an original expansion and refinement of these ideas. English scholars helped propel the tradition of logic forward, making unique contributions that would influence the course of medieval philosophy. Their engagement with issues of meaning, inference, and validity paved the way for more precise and sophisticated analysis in both the academic and ecclesiastical arenas. Thus, England in the Age of Intellectual Awakening set the stage for figures like William of Sherwood to rise. The confluence of continental influences, religious oversight, and domestic ambition created fertile ground for the development of the arts of reason. Sherwood's journey from obscurity to prominence was shaped by this dynamic environment, echoing the broader evolution of English and European thought. Chapter 3: The Early Life of William of Sherwood. The early years of William of Sherwood remain shrouded in the mists of medieval uncertainty. As with many medieval figures, records of his birth, lineage, and upbringing are sparse, requiring careful reconstruction through indirect evidence and contextual inference. Yet it is within these formative years that we begin to glimpse the seeds of the logician's later achievements. Born in the early 13th century, William likely hailed from the region of Sherwood in Nottinghamshire, an area steeped in both ecclesiastical and folkloric significance. Little is known of his family. However, given the education he received, it is probable that he was born into a family of some standing, with the resources or connections necessary to facilitate academic advancement. Sherwood's early education would have unfolded within the orbit of the church, as was common for promising young boys destined for intellectual or clerical careers. Cathedral schools provided instruction in Latin grammar, classical rhetoric, and the foundational elements of logic, skills essential for any aspiring scholar. The discipline and rigor of these schools, coupled with the mentorship of churchmen cultivated in the arts, formed the intellectual bedrock upon which William's later thought would be built. It is plausible that William's intellectual potential was recognized early, earning him the opportunity to further his studies at one of England's nascent universities or cathedral schools. The curriculum he encountered would have been shaped by the trivium, emphasizing logic as the key to unlocking both linguistic mastery and philosophical understanding. Here, William would have been exposed to the works of Aristotle, translated and interpreted by scholars such as Boethius, whose commentaries on logic were central to medieval education. Sherwood's quest for higher learning may well have prompted a journey to the continent, to Paris, renowned as the epicenter of scholastic thought. Such a journey would have been arduous, but not uncommon, as England's most ambitious scholars routinely sought to immerse themselves in the intellectual ferment of the University of Paris. Here, William would have encountered a vibrant academic community, engaging in heated debates, disputations, and commentaries on the emerging problems of logic and theology. The influences shaping Sherwood's early life were manifold. The intellectual legacy of Aristotle loomed large, but so too did the new methods and controversies introduced by Peter Abelard and later scholars. The tension between faith and reason, the demands for clarity and precision in disputation, and the growing complexity of philosophical analysis all left their mark on the young scholar. By his mid-20s, Sherwood's talents were likely recognized through his participation in university life, perhaps first as a student, then as a teacher. The culture of disputation, where scholars defended theses in public and responded to challenging questions, encouraged intellectual agility and robustness. Sherwood's facility with logical analysis, his command of terminology, and his capacity for conceptual clarity distinguished him as a thinker of promise. Though specific details about his personal life remain elusive, one can reasonably surmise that William's early years were shaped by a relentless pursuit of learning, supported by mentors, colleagues, and an academic culture that valued rigorous inquiry above all. His experiences as a student and budding scholar laid the groundwork for the contributions he would make to the field of logic, contributions that would resonate through the corridors of medieval thought and into the modern era. The mystery that surrounds Sherwood's early life is matched only by the clarity and precision of the work he produced later. The journey from Sherwood's forested environs to the hallowed halls of Paris encapsulates both the physical and intellectual odyssey that marked the life of one of the medieval world's most influential logicians. Chapter 4: The University of Paris, Cradle of Logic. The University of Paris, established in the 12th century, quickly asserted itself as the intellectual axis of Western Europe. Its commitment to scholarly rigor and the pursuit of universal truths placed it at the vanguard of philosophical and theological innovation, making it a magnetic destination for thinkers such as William of Sherwood. In Paris, the study of logic flourished amid a complex tapestry of academic tradition, disputational practice, and doctrinal oversight. The university's organizational structure, composed of faculties focusing on the arts, theology, law, and medicine, encouraged specialization and collaboration. The Faculty of Arts, in particular, gained renown as the locus for instruction in philosophy and logic, providing the foundation for later theological and scientific study. The pedagogical methods employed at Paris were distinctive. Instruction centered on the reading and commentary of authoritative texts, primarily Aristotle's Organon and its subsequent interpretations. Masters guided students through the subtleties of definition, inference, and contradiction, facilitating a culture in which dialectical skill was paramount. Disputations and quodlibetal questions formed a crucible for intellectual development, forcing both students and teachers to defend their positions with precision and ingenuity. Logical inquiry was integral to broader theological and philosophical questions. The clarity demanded by logic served to elucidate the most profound mysteries of the faith, enabling theologians to articulate doctrines with greater exactitude and reconcile apparent contradictions in scripture and tradition. Logic, as taught at Paris, was not a dry technical exercise, but a vital tool for all higher disciplines. William of Sherwood's tenure at Paris, either as a student, lecturer, or both, placed him at the very heart of this academic ferment. He encountered leading figures of the age, Albertus Magnus, whose commentaries on Aristotle were shaping the curriculum, John of Salisbury, advocate for the ethical application of logical principles, and Peter of Spain, whose own treatises would become foundational texts in European logic. The production and dissemination of logical texts were central activities at Paris. Scribes and scholars worked together to produce glosses, summaries, and commentaries, ensuring the circulation of both ancient and contemporary works. It was within this milieu that Sherwood would pen his own treatise, Introductiones in Logicum, synthesizing the teachings of Aristotle with the innovations of contemporary scholars. Beyond its academic rigors, Paris offered a cosmopolitan environment. Students and masters from every corner of Europe mingled together, sharing ideas, debating doctrines, and forging the intellectual networks that would define the age. The city itself, its streets filled with scholars, its bookstores overflowing with manuscripts, was a hive of intellectual activity. The University of Paris's unique blend of institutional structure, pedagogical method, and intellectual ambition thus positioned it as the cradle of logic in medieval Europe. For William of Sherwood, the experience was transformative, shaping both his theoretical outlook and his practical approach to the discipline. The influence of Parisian logic would pervade his later works, ensuring that his contributions remained both relevant and influential. In sum, the University of Paris was more than an academic institution. It was the academy at which the medieval world's greatest minds labored to uncover the principles underlying reason, faith, and reality. It cultivated the environment in which William of Sherwood, armed with the tools of rigorous analysis and dialectical acuity, would leave an indelible mark on the history of logic. Chapter 5. Teachers, Thinkers, and Influences. The intellectual landscape in which William of Sherwood operated was richly populated by teachers, thinkers, and traditions that profoundly shaped his thought. To understand the contours of Sherwood's contributions, one must first examine the forces and figures that influenced him during his formative years and beyond. At the foundation of medieval logic stood Aristotle, the ancient master whose works dominated scholarly discourse. The Organon, comprising texts on categories, interpretation, analytics, and sophistical refutations, formed the bedrock upon which all subsequent logical inquiry was based. Medieval scholars, Sherwood included, treated Aristotle's works not simply as venerable relics, but as living documents demanding interpretation, extension, and refinement. Boethius, the 6th century Roman philosopher, served as the principal mediator of Aristotelian thought to the Latin West. His translations, commentaries, and original treatises supplemented the medieval curriculum, offering clarity and structure to otherwise arcane philosophical concepts. Sherwood's engagement with Boethian logic is evident in his own writings, which draw upon and update the established doctrines concerning terms, propositions, and syllogisms. Peter Abelard, a contemporary intellect whose life and controversies galvanized academic life in Paris, greatly influenced the development of dialectical method. Abelard's bold applications of logic to theology, his insistence upon clarity and consistency, and his capacity for rigorous debate inspired generations of logicians, including Sherwood. Abelard's Sic et Non, with its methodical juxtaposition of contradictory statements, encapsulated the scholastic commitment to systematic analysis. Albertus Magnus and Thomas Aquinas expanded the logical horizon yet further. Their integration of Aristotelian philosophy with Christian doctrine encouraged logical clarity in the service of theological truth. While Sherwood preceded Aquinas, he operated within the currents these figures set in motion, sharing their commitment to precision, rigor, and systematic thought. Peter of Spain, whose Sumulae Logicales gained widespread popularity in university curricula, provided both competition and inspiration. Sherwood's own Introductiones in Logicum was, in part, a response to the demand for accessible, structured textbooks that synthesized existing logical methods for new generations of students. Yet, it was not only great men who shaped Sherwood's approach. The university environment itself, with its constant disputations, its emphasis on public defense of ideas, and its communal search for truth, served as an ever-present teacher. The rapid circulation of texts, commentaries, and glosses ensured that Sherwood was plugged into a dynamic network of intellectual exchange. Simultaneously, the ecclesiastical authorities exercised both oversight and encouragement. Their insistence upon orthodoxy compelled logicians to tread carefully, melding faith and reason without overstepping doctrinal boundaries. The exigencies of scriptural interpretation and theological clarity made logic indispensable, pushing scholars to refine their methods and avoid error. Sherwood's peers, students, and even adversaries shaped his approach as well. The competitive nature of academic life, where one's reputation rested upon the ability to defend and articulate ideas, fostered ingenuity and ambition. Sherwood's style, marked by concise definition and careful distinction, arose as much from the demands of disputation as from the influence of great thinkers. In sum, William of Sherwood's intellectual formation was the product of myriad influences: classical authorities, contemporary masters, peers, institutional structures, and ecclesiastical mandates. His work reflects both the tradition he inherited and the innovations he introduced, positioning him as both heir and pioneer in the great adventure of medieval logic. Chapter 6. The Birth of Introductions in Logicum, The creation of William of Sherwood's Introductions in Logicum marks a defining moment in the history of medieval logic. Conceived amid the intellectual ferment of Paris, the treatise stands as Sherwood's principal contribution to the discipline, synthesizing centuries of philosophical inquiry into a systematic, accessible text intended for both students and established scholars. Sherwood's aim was clear: to produce a practical manual that distilled the complexities of logic into comprehensible and usable principles. Introductiones in Logicum addressed the pressing need for clarity and instruction amid the expanding university curricula, offering guidance to those tasked with navigating the dense forests of Aristotelian and Boethian thought. The treatise is characterized by its organizational clarity. Sherwood begins with fundamental issues of terminology, defining the distinctions between terms, signs, and reference, and proceeds systematically to the structure of propositions and the patterns of argumentation. He eschews lengthy digressions and metaphysical speculation in favor of concise definitions and practical examples, making the text immediately useful for students preparing for public disputations and examinations. Sherwood's approach reflects the pedagogical priorities of his time. Disputation, central to university instruction, necessitated a clear understanding of logic's principles and methods. Introductions in Logicum provided the theoretical foundation upon which effective disputational practice could be built, guiding students through the identification of valid and invalid arguments, the construction of syllogisms, and the detection of logical fallacies. In its treatment of terms and propositions, Sherwood's treatise stands out for its precision and nuance. He distinguishes between categorimatic and syncategorimatic terms, explicates their function in sentences, and explores the complexities of reference and meaning. His analysis anticipates many later developments in semantics and the philosophy of language, cementing his reputation as a thinker ahead of his time. Sherwood's treatment of the syllogism, the centerpiece of medieval logic, is both comprehensive and innovative. He enumerates the various forms and figures of syllogistic reasoning, provides clear criteria for validity, and offers instructive examples drawn from both philosophical and theological contexts. His explanations are tailored to the needs of both novices and advanced scholars, ensuring broad accessibility. The influence of Introductions in Logicum quickly became apparent. The treatise circulated widely among university faculties, becoming a favored textbook for logic instruction. Its clarity, organization, and practical emphasis set a standard for subsequent logical manuals, influencing not only contemporary teachers and students, but also shaping the development of logic in the centuries to follow. Sherwood's work was not without its critics. Some contemporary scholars objected to its brevity or challenged particular points of doctrine. Yet for the majority, Introductiones in Logicum offered an indispensable guide for the complex art of reasoning, filling a void left by more ponderous and arcane texts. The birth of Introductiones in Logicum thus represents both a personal achievement and a contribution to the collective advancement of medieval logic. William of Sherwood's synthesis of tradition, clarity, and innovation established his treatise as a primary source for generations of logicians and students. Its enduring relevance testifies to Sherwood's insight and his deep understanding of the needs and challenges of medieval intellectual life. Chapter 7. The Language of Thought, Terms and Propositions. The edifice of logic is built upon the solid foundation of language. For William of Sherwood and his medieval contemporaries, understanding the mechanics of thought required a meticulous examination of how terms and propositions functioned as the basic units of reasoning. In the Introductions in Logicum, Sherwood articulated the essential vocabulary of logical analysis, lending clarity to scholastic debates and the pursuit of truth. Terms serve as the atoms of logical discourse, They are the simplest significative elements, a word or phrase, through which we name or denote objects, concepts, or qualities. In Sherwood's framework, terms are classified according to their function in reasoning. Subject terms refer to the object of discourse, the entity about which something is asserted. Predicate terms express what is affirmed or denied of the subject. Consider the proposition, Socrates is wise. Here, Socrates is the subject term and wise the predicate term. The careful differentiation between subjects and predicates enables scholars to construct meaningful and precise statements. Moreover, Sherwood recognized the importance of universal versus particular terms. Universal terms such as man or triangle refer to classes or species, while particular terms like this man or this triangle indicate specific instances. The insistence on distinguishing between universals and particulars mirrored broader medieval preoccupations with categories and the problem of universals, a central theme in philosophical discourse. The next logical unit is the proposition, conceived as a complete statement capable of being true or false. Propositions unite terms within a grammatical and logical framework. They are the vehicles of assertion, denial, and inquiry. Sherwood's examination of propositions involved not only syntactic considerations, how words are arranged, but also semantic concerns, what the proposition conveys about reality. Propositions fall under several classifications within the scholastic tradition. The most fundamental are affirmative and negative propositions. An affirmative proposition asserts a connection between subject and predicate, e.g., all men are mortal, while a negative proposition denies such a connection, e.g., no man is immortal. Sherwood's elaboration of these structures was crucial for identifying the form and truth of assertions made in theological and philosophical argumentation. Further, propositions could be categorical or hypothetical. Categorical propositions make a simple assertion or denial, as in the earlier examples. Hypothetical propositions, by contrast, predicate one statement upon another, e.g., if Socrates is a man, then Socrates is mortal. This distinction paved the way for more complex forms of reasoning and logical relationships, a key consideration in later developments of modal and conditional logic. Sherwood's scrutiny of meaning was also instrumental. He recognized that terms could be equivocal, having multiple meanings, or univocal, having a single, consistent meaning. The clarification of ambiguous terms was necessary for precise debate and analysis. In many cases, debates among theologians and philosophers hinged upon the exact meaning conveyed by a term or proposition, and Sherwood's distinctions facilitated greater accuracy and less confusion. The medieval discussion of language, influenced by earlier developments in grammar and semantics, stressed the need to consider both supposition, what a term stands for in a particular context, and signification, the general meaning of the term. Sherwood's treatments of supposition involved intricate rules for determining whether a term stood for an individual, a universal, or something else entirely within the proposition's context. Sherwood's detailed systemization of terms and propositions was not merely an academic exercise. It was foundational for logic's role in intellectual life, enabling scholars to evaluate the soundness of arguments, the truth of claims, and the coherence of doctrine. In doing so, Sherwood offered tools for both analytical rigor and charitable interpretation, cultivating habits of thought necessary for the pursuit of certainty in complex theological and philosophical matters. Through these efforts, Sherwood profoundly shaped the language of medieval thought. His distinctions endured, providing a framework for later logicians, philosophers, and theologians. The subsequent chapters will build upon this foundation, revealing how the artful use of terms and propositions paved the way for the construction of syllogisms, the articulation of reasoning, and the emergence of logic as the bedrock of medieval knowledge. Chapter 8. The Art of Argument. syllogisms, and reasoning. Central to the discipline of logic is the construction and evaluation of arguments. For William of Sherwood, the art of argument was synonymous with the proper use of syllogisms, a structured form of deductive reasoning inherited from Aristotle and refined by generations of scholars. In medieval scholasticism, the syllogism became both a tool and a subject of intricate curiosity, as it offered a method for establishing truth through logical necessity. A syllogism consists of three parts: the major premise, the minor premise, and the conclusion. Each premise contains two terms, arranged such that the conclusion marries the subject of the minor premise to the predicate of the major premise through their shared connection. For instance, major premise, all men are mortal. Minor premise, Socrates is a man. Conclusion, therefore, Socrates is mortal. Sherwood's treatment of syllogisms concentrated on the structure and validity of arguments. He identified the primary forms or figures based on the arrangement of terms, and the moods determined by the types, affirmative or negative, universal or particular, of premises used. There are three figures recognized in classic syllogistic analysis. First figure, the middle term, is the subject of the major premise and the predicate of the minor premise. Second figure, the middle term appears as the predicate in both premises. Third figure, the middle term is the subject in both premises. Sherwood's systematic approach to figures and moods enabled logicians to enumerate valid forms and detect fallacies. This was especially important in medieval universities, where public disputation and rigorous argumentation were daily practices. In addition to categorical syllogisms, Sherwood made advances in the analysis of hypothetical syllogisms, those involving conditional or alternative premises. Such forms expressed as if A then B, or either A or B, expanded the realm of reasoning, anticipating modern insights into conditional logic. Sherwood also emphasized the need for conversion and reduction, techniques that allow premises to be restructured to fit recognized valid moods. Conversion, for instance, entails switching the subject and predicate in a proposition from all S is P to some P is S, under proper logical constraints. Reduction refers to transforming a syllogism into a first-figure mood for easier testing of validity. The utility of syllogistic reasoning extended well beyond academic exercises. In theology, law, and philosophy, the detection of fallacies, invalid but superficially plausible arguments, was essential for truth-seeking and eliminating error. Sherwood equipped students with the conceptual tools necessary for recognizing the multifaceted ways arguments could run awry. Through equivocation, amphiboly, ambiguity in syntax, or illicit processes, such as using terms in premises that fail to connect properly in the conclusion. Furthermore, Sherwood's analysis of induction, reasoning from particular cases to general principles, and abduction, inferring the best explanation from available evidence, reflected a nuanced appreciation for logical variety. While deduction remained dominant, acknowledging these alternative methods showcased Sherwood's flexibility and philosophical depth. In medieval education, argumentation was more than an intellectual pastime. It was deeply intertwined with the defense of doctrine, the construction of ethical frameworks, and the adjudication of disputes. Sherwood's logical texts were practical manuals for students ascending through the curriculum of the trivium, grammar, rhetoric, and logic, preparing them for the sophisticated disputations at the heart of scholastic inquiry. By cultivating habits of careful reasoning and attention to logical form, Sherwood laid the groundwork for the development of critical thought across generations. Syllogisms became the scaffolding on which greater edifices of knowledge could be constructed. Sherwood's legacy, pervasive in universities and monastic schools, is found in the precision and discipline required for genuine philosophical and theological advancement. In sum, the art of argument, as interpreted by Sherwood, was both a science and a craft. It demanded not only technical knowledge, but also intellectual virtue, the courage to follow truth wherever it led, the humility to recognize fallibility, and the resolve to clarify ambiguous ideas. This chapter has outlined the structure and function of syllogistic reasoning, revealing its foundational status in the history of logic. The next chapter will investigate how logic, empowered by these tools, came to be regarded as the cornerstone of human knowledge. Chapter 9. Logic as the foundation of knowledge. Logic, in the medieval intellectual landscape, was much more than a technical apparatus. It was the very framework upon which knowledge rested. From the 12th century onward, as the works of Aristotle were rediscovered and disseminated, logic became the foundation stone for all higher scholarly and philosophical endeavors. William of Sherwood played a pivotal role in this transformation, advocating logic as the indispensable avenue for acquiring and confirming truth. The medieval curriculum, structured around the trivium, grammar, rhetoric, and logic, placed logic at its pinnacle. Grammar facilitated the understanding of language, rhetoric the persuasive use of speech, but logic alone provided the structure for valid and reliable thought. Sherwood's treatises echoed this hierarchy, insisting that mastery of logic was necessary for advancement in philosophy, theology, and the sciences. Sherwood's system established logic as the means for distinguishing knowledge from opinion. Knowledge was seen as justified true belief, informed by reason, tested by logical form, and confirmed through argument. Opinion, on the other hand, lacked the rigorous foundation of logical certainty, often succumbing to rhetorical flourish or theological passion without sufficient evidentiary support. Through the construction and evaluation of arguments, logic enabled scholars to identify valid inferences and to expose fallacies. Sherwood's work provided numerous examples of the types of errors that could infect reasoning, affirming the consequent, denying the antecedent, false cause, and others. By cataloging these fallacies and teaching methods of detection, Sherwood advanced a culture of intellectual vigilance. In theology, logic was indispensable for interpreting and defending dogma. The great disputes between scholastics often revolved around fine points of doctrine, requiring precise and nuanced argumentation. Sherwood and his successors wielded logic as a means to reconcile apparent contradictions, clarify doctrine, and argue for the coherence and rationality of faith. As Thomas Aquinas would later insist, faith does not oppose reason. Rather, faith seeks understanding, a search made possible through the disciplined practice of logic. Sherwood's conception of logic extended beyond deductive reasoning. He examined the role of analogy and probability in philosophical and theological debate. Not every truth could be demonstrated with the certainty of a syllogism. Some required thoughtful consideration of evidence, inference to the best explanation, or appeals to analogy. In these cases, logic provided the guardrails for rational thought, preventing descent into mere speculation. One of Sherwood's most profound contributions was his recognition of the limits of logic. While logic could expose fallacies and clarify arguments, it could not supply premises about the world independently. The sources of premises, empirical observation, authoritative testimony, or self-evident truths, remained outside the direct domain of logical analysis. By acknowledging these boundaries, Sherwood anticipated later debates about the foundations of knowledge and the role of reason in human understanding. Sherwood fostered a view of logic as a universal grammar of thought. Just as grammar governed the rules of language, logic governed the structure of reason itself. This analogy was persuasive, inviting scholars to treat logic as the underlying architecture of all intellectual pursuits. Whether one engaged in philosophy, law, natural science, or theology, the rules of logic were the constant companions, offering certainty amid the shifting sands of contention. In practice, The rise of logic as foundational was evident in the scholastic disputations that characterized medieval universities. Students and masters engaged in public debates, defending positions through careful logical reasoning and refuting opponents through identification of logical errors. Victory was not determined by rhetorical flourish or personal authority, but by adherence to the principles of valid inference, principles codified and transmitted by Sherwood and his peers. Sherwood's vision of logic as the foundation of knowledge did not end with his lifetime. It was sustained and developed by successive generations, by Albert the Great, Aquinas, Occam, and hundreds of lesser-known scholars. The influence of this vision extended into the Renaissance and beyond, shaping the methods of Descartes, Leibniz, and modern philosophers. In conclusion, logic, as articulated by William of Sherwood, was not merely a scholarly discipline, but the soul of intellectual inquiry. Its principles, tested and refined in centuries of debate, continue to guide the pursuit of knowledge. The subsequent chapters will detail the rise of the medieval logicians and Sherwood's place within a vibrant community of thinkers who transformed reason into a living tradition. Chapter 10. The rise of the medieval logicians. The Middle Ages witnessed a dramatic intellectual revival, in part powered by the rediscovery of classical texts and the forging of new methods in logical analysis. At the heart of this revival stood not just isolated geniuses, but vibrant communities of scholars whose debates and doctrines shaped the course of Western thought. William of Sherwood occupies a distinguished position among these medieval logicians, whose rise was both a consequence and a catalyst of scholastic vigor. The movement began in the 12th century, with the translation of Aristotle's logical works from Greek and Arabic sources into Latin. These texts, the Organon, became foundational documents for European scholars who studied, taught, and commented upon them in newly established centers of learning, such as the University of Paris and Oxford. Sherwood's contributions were emblematic of the new spirit of inquiry. His introductions in Logicam offered a systematic and accessible guide to Aristotelian logic, tailored for the needs of medieval students. Unlike earlier commentators who tended to preserve established doctrines, Sherwood and his contemporaries innovated, introducing subtle distinctions and methodological refinements. Their approach was analytic and critical, seeking not only to transmit Aristotle, but to improve upon him where possible. The curriculum of logic in medieval universities was rigorous. Students began with the categories, the basic divisions of being, and advanced through the study of terms, propositions, syllogisms, and fallacies. The goal was to produce thinkers capable of engaging in the disputatio, a formalized debate central to academic life. Here, logical prowess was tested in the crucible of intellectual competition, and success required mastery of both theory and application. Sherwood's influence is visible in the gradual professionalization of logic. The distinction between logic and dialectic, once blurred, became increasingly clear as logic was recognized as the discipline concerned specifically with the rules of valid inference. Dialectic was seen as the broader art of conversation and argument, encompassing rhetoric and persuasion, but depending critically on logical foundations. The rise of medieval logicians was accompanied by a flourishing of commentary literature. Scholars wrote detailed glosses of Aristotle's texts, incorporating observations from Sherwood, Abelard, and Peter of Spain, among others. These commentaries reflected a sophisticated engagement with the problems of meaning, inference, and argumentation, often anticipating questions that would become central in later philosophy. A key development was the expansion of logic beyond the syllogism. Medieval logicians debated the nature of modal reasoning, possibility and necessity, temporal logic, claims about the past, present and future, and the intricacies of supposition, theory, how terms stand for objects in different contexts. Sherwood contributed to these discussions, especially in his analysis of ambiguous terms and propositions, which provided essential tools for the detection of fallacies. The institutional context of logic's rise cannot be overlooked. Universities offered structured courses in logic with set texts and examinations. Logical proficiency was required for advancement to higher degrees in philosophy and theology, and mastery of logical skills became a hallmark of intellectual achievement. Despite its premier status, logic was never an isolated pursuit. Rather, it was inseparably bound to grammar, rhetoric, philosophy, and above all, theology. Theologians relied on logical distinctions to resolve doctrinal disputes. Philosophers employed logical analysis to investigate the fundamental nature of reality, mind, and God. Throughout this period, debate and dialogue flourished. Logicians argued over the interpretation of Aristotle, the resolution of paradoxes, and the legitimacy of various logical forms. The intellectual culture was competitive and collaborative, often marked by spirited exchanges and mutual critique. Sherwood's work circulated widely, cited by students and scholars across Europe, and stood as both a model and a challenge for those who sought to refine the art of reasoning. The rise of medieval logicians, then, was not a solitary ascent, but a collective achievement. It involved the creation of new institutions, the development of new methods, and the formation of new intellectual communities. At the center stood figures like William of Sherwood, whose treatises galvanized generations of thinkers and fortified the tradition of logic as the backbone of scholarly life. As we turn to Sherwood's contemporaries in the following chapter, we can appreciate how his influence was both complemented and questioned by the likes of Albert the Great, Thomas Aquinas, and William of Ockham. Their debates and contributions ensured that the logical tradition remained dynamic and responsive to new challenges, sustaining its role as the foundation of medieval knowledge. Chapter 11. Sherwood's contemporaries, Albert Aquinas and Ockham. The intellectual ferment of the 13th century produced some of the greatest minds in Western philosophy and theology. Among them, William of Sherwood occupies a distinguished yet sometimes overshadowed position when compared with his better-known contemporaries, Albert the Great, Thomas Aquinas, and William of Ockham. Understanding Sherwood's place within this milieu is essential for appreciating both the uniqueness of his contributions and the dialogic nature of medieval scholarship. Albert the Great, revered as a polymath and a pioneer in integrating Aristotelian natural philosophy into the Christian intellectual tradition, exemplified the scholarly breadth of the period. His vast encyclopedic writings encompassed not only logic and philosophy, but also the natural sciences. Albert's approach to logic was characterized by a systematic organization and synthesis of Aristotelian concepts, shaping the curriculum of the universities and setting a standard for subsequent generations. Sherwood, though less encyclopedic than Albert, shared his passion for clarity and systematic treatment. Particularly in his logical texts, Thomas Aquinas, perhaps the most influential theologian of the scholastic era, forged a masterful synthesis of Aristotelian philosophy with Christian doctrine. His monumental Summa Theologiae illustrates the scholastic method in its highest form, rigorous, logical, and deeply analytical. Aquinas built upon the foundations of earlier medieval logicians, and while his work surpasses Sherwood's in theological depth, Aquinas relied upon the logical structures and terminologies articulated by predecessors and contemporaries alike. Sherwood's treatises on supposition and logical analysis became staple references for students moving on to theological disputation, a clear testament to the foundational role his work played. William of Ockham, somewhat later than Sherwood, is famous for Ockham's razor, the principle advocating for explanatory simplicity. Occam's innovations in logic, especially his focus on language and mental representation, marked a turn toward nominalism and the analysis of language's role in reasoning. While Occam is sometimes considered more radical, his logical inquiries echo those pioneered by Sherwood, especially the careful distinction between the referential functions of words and the structure of arguments. Sherwood's intellectual context was thus one of lively debate, interaction, and cumulative development. The medieval university, with its commitment to dialectical method and institutionalized disputation, fostered an environment in which ideas were tested, refined, and transmitted. Sherwood's position as a magister at Oxford and Paris placed him at the heart of this ferment, where his clarity and teaching acumen left a lasting mark. His engagement with the ideas of his contemporaries, whether directly or indirectly, was characterized by both respect and critical evaluation, ensuring the continual advancement of logic within the scholastic tradition. Sherwood deserves recognition not merely as a precursor, but as an active shaper of medieval logic. His endeavors to clarify and codify the forms and functions of argument helped solidify logic as a formal discipline, separating it from the broader realm of philosophy and giving it a distinct methodological identity. In doing so, he set the stage for the subsequent advancements of his contemporaries, demonstrating that intellectual progress is always collaborative, built upon the combined efforts of many minds. The following chapters will further explore how Sherwood's thought both drew upon and influenced the vibrant circle of logic and theology in his age. Chapter 12. The Bridge Between Aristotle and the Middle Ages. The resurgence of Aristotelian logic in the medieval West was neither instantaneous nor straightforward. By the early 13th century, the works of Aristotle had begun to filter into the European intellectual sphere, primarily through translations from Arabic and Greek sources. This resulted in an explosive fusion of ancient philosophical rigor with the largely theological concerns of medieval scholars. William of Sherwood was among those who confronted the challenge of rendering Aristotle's intricate logic accessible and relevant to a new era. The bridge between Aristotle and the Middle Ages was constructed not simply by translating texts, but by interpreting, teaching, and expanding upon them. Sherwood played a crucial role in this process, both as a commentator and as an original thinker. His introductions in Logicum became one of the first comprehensive manuals of logic for students and scholars navigating Aristotle's Organon. The clarity and pedagogical utility of Sherwood's work made Aristotelian logic an integral part of the medieval curriculum. Sherwood's innovation began with his emphasis on the formal properties of reasoning. Prior to his interventions, much of the study of logic in Western Europe was limited to the so-called Old Logic, Logica Vetus, which focused primarily on categories and simple syllogisms. The New Logic, Logica Nova, which included Aristotle's treatises on propositions, fallacies, and the posterior analytics, demanded a higher degree of analytical sophistication. Sherwood provided the tools and terminologies necessary for engaging fully with these texts. One of Sherwood's most significant achievements was his development of theories concerning supposition, a complex doctrine dealing with the referential function of terms within propositions. This innovation enabled medieval logicians to articulate precisely the circumstances under which statements could be considered true or false, a significant leap beyond the logic inherited from antiquity. In this regard, Sherwood provided not only a bridge, but a scaffold upon which later scholars could build. The role of a medieval logician extended beyond mere exegesis of Aristotle. Sherwood, like his peers, understood the necessity of adapting ancient doctrines to contemporary needs. The European university, unlike any institution in Aristotle's day, demanded curriculum that could train students for careers in law, medicine, and above all, theology. Logic, therefore, was not a luxury, but an essential tool. Sherwood's works address these practical concerns, providing clear exposition, practical examples, and systematic guidance. His manuals became indispensable not only at Oxford, but at universities across Christendom. Furthermore, Sherwood's approach to logic was deeply collaborative. He drew from the glosses and marginalia of earlier translators and commentators, such as Boethius and Peter Abelard, while contributing original distinctions and methodologies. This cumulative approach helped shape a uniquely medieval form of logic, one that was both heir to Aristotle and ancestor of later developments. In retrospect, the bridge that Sherwood and his contemporaries built was foundational to Western intellectual history. By making Aristotle's logic relevant to the needs and conditions of the medieval world, they transformed not only how people reasoned, but what could be reasoned about. Subsequent chapters will explore how this synthesis of reason and faith underwrote the vast intellectual achievements of the Middle Ages and beyond. Chapter 13: Faith, Reason, and the Pursuit of Truth. The medieval intellect lived and breathed within a world suffused with the divine, where reason and faith were not mutually exclusive, but dialogical. In this landscape, William of Sherwood carved a unique niche, balancing rigorous logical inquiry with a profound respect for religious doctrine. Chapter 3 examines how Sherwood and his contemporaries navigated the complex interplay between reason and faith, drawing upon both to pursue truth. Medieval philosophy was predicated on the conviction that truth is one, though it may be discovered through various avenues: revelation, tradition, and rational inquiry. The scholastic movement, of which Sherwood was a part, sought to harmonize these paths. Logic was the vehicle for this harmonization. It provided a common grammar for discourse, a mode of analysis that could lay bare the structures of argument and belief alike. Sherwood's works exemplify this synthesis. In his treatises, logic is not merely a formal exercise, but a tool for uncovering truth in both the secular and sacred realms. For example, his attention to the notion of supposition, distinguishing whether a term referred to its concrete instantiation, its universal form, or something else entirely, became crucial in refining theological argumentation. The scholastics could argue, with unprecedented subtlety, about the attributes of the divine, the meaning of scriptural passages, or the conceptual nature of sacraments, all on the basis of logical clarity. The question of faith versus reason was never far from the minds of medieval logicians. In Sherwood's vocabulary, reason is not the antagonist of faith, but its partner. Rational analysis, he argues, provides the believer with the tools to explicate and defend doctrine. At times, it even enables the uncovering of deeper layers of meaning, revealing the rational structure underpinning mysteries of the faith. This approach, however, posed inherent challenges. How far could reason go in probing the mysteries of the divine? Would continued rational analysis eventually erode faith's foundations, or would it deepen them? Sherwood approached this dilemma with characteristic prudence. His works exemplify the modest confidence of medieval logic, a belief in reason's validity within the boundaries set by revelation and dogma. Through his interventions, Sherwood contributed to the development of the quaestio, the scholastic form of disputation. The quaestio revolved around the systematic posing, disputing, and resolution of questions, making use of logic to adjudicate between competing positions. Here the balance between faith and reason becomes dynamic, each spurring the other towards greater clarity and mutual enrichment. Sherwood's method laid the groundwork for intellectual dialogue in Western Christendom. By reconciling faith and reason, he opened the door to vast fields of knowledge, hitherto seen as off-limits to rational inquiry. This legacy is not only theoretical but practical, reflected in the curriculum of medieval universities and in the everyday life of scholars who sought truth in the spires of Oxford, the lecture halls of Paris, and the cloisters of Christendom. In summary, William of Sherwood's pursuit of truth exemplified the medieval ideal, a world in which reason refines faith and faith sharpens reason, both converging in the endless quest for understanding. This dialectical approach would profoundly shape not only theology, but the philosophy, science, and culture of the West. Chapter 14. Logic in Theology, Reasoning about the Divine. In the closely intertwined intellectual landscape of the Middle Ages, theology stood as the queen of the sciences, and logic was her trusted handmaiden. William of Sherwood, alongside his contemporaries, played a pivotal role in refining the use of logic as a critical tool within theology. This chapter explores how logical frameworks, as developed by Sherwood, facilitated a deeper and more disciplined theological discourse that still resonates in religious scholarship today. The enduring challenge for theologians has always been how to speak meaningfully about the divine, whose essence ostensibly transcends human comprehension. The answer in the scholastic tradition, influenced heavily by Aristotelian logic and adapted by the likes of Sherwood, was to employ the most sophisticated tools of reason at their disposal. Sherwood's logical treatises equipped theologians with a language for subtle distinctions between essence and existence, substance and attribute, or necessity and contingency. Central to this was the concept of supposition. The doctrine of supposition, as delineated by Sherwood, enabled theologians to clarify whether a term referred to an entity in actuality as an abstraction or as a name only. In theological debates, such as discussions about the Trinity, the ability to articulate whether God refers to the divine essence, the persons of the Godhead, or the concept itself proved indispensable. Logical clarity here became theological precision. Furthermore, Sherwood advanced the study of fallacies and argument forms. Many heresies and doctrinal deviations, according to medieval theologians, were at root logical fallacies. By formalizing the identification of such fallacies, Sherwood's system protected theological discourse from confusion and error, ensuring the purity of doctrine. His logical manuals were used in disputations where issues like transubstantiation, the incarnation, and the attributes of God were rigorously examined and defended. Sherwood's influence extended into the structuring of theological debate itself. The scholastic method, which dominated the universities, relied on the quaestio disputata, the formal disputation, where skilled use of logic was paramount. Here, arguments for and against a proposition were weighed, objections countered, and syntheses achieved, all according to strict logical protocols. Sherwood's rigorous attention to definitions, distinctions, and procedures made these debates intellectually fruitful rather than circular or rhetorical. The benefits of this logical approach were not without limits. Even the best logical argument, Sherwood acknowledged, could not pierce the mysteries safeguarded by revelation. However, by placing limits on rational discourse, logic actually protected theology from overreach. The use of logical method delineated the boundaries of permissible debate, allowing faith and reason to coexist fruitfully. In conclusion, William of Sherwood's logical innovations were not confined to abstract philosophical circles, but permeated the very heart of theological discourse. By providing theologians with the means to reason rigorously about the divine and to adjudicate complex doctrinal issues, he ensured that medieval theology would remain an intellectually serious and vibrant enterprise. His legacy endures in every subsequent era that seeks to reconcile the claims of reason and revelation. Chapter 15. The Evolution of Logical Teaching. The medieval era witnessed an extraordinary confluence of intellectual traditions, blending classical authority with emergent scholastic inquiry. Logic, once a stylistic pursuit dominated by the works of Aristotle, gradually found a new home in the bustling halls and classrooms of burgeoning universities. It was within this dynamic milieu that William of Sherwood emerged and fundamentally altered the trajectory and methodology of logical instruction. At the heart of Medieval logical teaching lay the integration of Aristotle's organon, particularly the prior analytics and posterior analytics. These texts were translated and commented upon, offering essential frameworks for reasoning, argument, and categorization. The deductive structures contained therein informed both the structure and substance of discourse on logic throughout the Middle Ages. However, the direct transmission of Aristotelian thought posed unique challenges. The dense Greek terminology, the philosophical presuppositions, and the subtle distinctions required sensitive interpretation and careful adaptation to Latin scholastic contexts. William of Sherwood's intervention was both timely and innovative. In his seminal Introductions in Logicum, Sherwood crafted a concise, approachable guide tailored explicitly to students. He distilled complex arguments into digestible sections, introduced methodical treatments of logical terms, and refined the famous theory of supposition, a mechanism for clarifying how terms stand for things within propositions. This approach revolutionized the teaching of logic, shifting emphasis from rote memorization of texts to active engagement with the structures of language and argument. Supposition theory, in particular, marked a turning point. The question of how words refer to objects in the world, whether singly or collectively, categorically or distributively, had bedeviled philosophers for centuries. Sherwood's treatment defined three primary modes: personal supposition, simple supposition, and material supposition. By clearly differentiating how terms operate within various logical contexts, Sherwood afforded students and scholars an unprecedented toolkit for parsing both mathematical and philosophical reasoning. This not only resolved previously persistent ambiguities, but also empowered further developments by later logicians such as Peter of Spain and John. Buridan Sherwood's pedagogical style was innovative in its accessibility. Eschewing the elaborate rhetorical flourishes of his predecessors, he focused on clarity, precision, and the practical application of logical tools. His treatises were marked by well-organized structure, concise definitions, and illustrative examples, a format that became the standard for medieval logic textbooks. Moreover, the collaborative culture of early university life meant that his works were rapidly disseminated, commented upon, and integrated into the core curriculum. Another hallmark of the Sherwoodian method was his commitment to dialogue and disputation as teaching strategies. He recognized the value of active debate as a means to deepen understanding and hone logical skills. The medieval classroom, often framed as a dialectical encounter between master and pupils, was transformed into a space for cooperative reasoning and critical reflection. Sherwood's influence permeated not only the written texts, but also the interactive methods whereby logic was learned, tested, and advanced. The context of Sherwood's work was not without its challenges. Logic at the time was intricately bound up with the theological imperatives of the Christian tradition. The stakes of reasoning extended beyond academic finesse, permeating doctrinal disputes, scriptural interpretation, and the defense of orthodoxy. As a result, the evolution of logical teaching required careful navigation of both secular and sacred domains. Sherwood's deftness in balancing these demands endowed his treatises with enduring relevance, allowing them to flourish in diverse intellectual milieus. The legacy of William of Sherwood's innovations in logical teaching can be traced through the successive waves of scholastic philosophy. His methodological clarity, technical precision, and pedagogical ingenuity invited a flowering of dialectical reasoning unprecedented in the history of European thought. By transforming logic from an obscure specialty into a foundational discipline, Sherwood laid the groundwork for future generations of philosophers, mathematicians, and scientists. In sum, the evolution of logical teaching in the Middle Ages found in William of Sherwood a pivotal figure, one whose insights and strategies continue to inform the very way we understand argument, language, and truth. Through his systematic approach, clear articulation, and unwavering devotion to the intellectual empowerment of students, Sherwood reimagined the possibilities of logic as both an art and a science. The ripples of his influence extend far beyond his own era, shaping the enduring contours of education and inquiry across the centuries. Chapter 16. William's Later Years and Legacy. The arc of William of Sherwood's career, stretching from humble beginnings to profound influence, provides a remarkable case study in the transmission and endurance of intellectual legacy. While much of his early life remains shrouded in historical obscurity, the contours of his later years reveal a thinker who was not merely a passive observer of his time, but a proactive shaper of future scholarship. Having established his reputation as a master of logic, William of Sherwood found himself increasingly engaged with both the academic and ecclesiastical spheres of medieval society. The close kinship between logical inquiry and theological debate necessitated philosophers who could maneuver through doctrinal labyrinths, and Sherwood's expertise in supposition theory and dialectical method made him indispensable to the scholastic institutions of Paris and Oxford. His treatises were eagerly sought after by students, copied by hand, and circulated widely, becoming standard references in the study of argumentation. As he matured, Sherwood shifted his focus from teaching the foundational elements of logic to grappling with more sophisticated philosophical problems. He explored the relationship between language and reality, examining the nuances of signification and reference at a depth that prefigured later semiotic theories. His engagement with contemporary debates, such as those concerning universals, categories, and the nature of inference, demonstrated a keen awareness of the limitations and possibilities inherent in logical analysis. Sherwood's legacy was not confined to the written word. He was known for mentoring a cadre of promising scholars, many of whom went on to develop and disseminate his ideas further. The culture of commentary and disputation, central to medieval learning, encouraged students to augment and challenge Sherwood's doctrines, thereby ensuring their dynamic evolution. In this way, Sherwood's influence extended vertically, shaping both the curriculum and the intellectual ethos of Europe's foremost educational centers. In his later years, the recognition of Sherwood's contributions began to transcend the confines of academic circles. Church authorities sought his counsel in navigating complex theological quandaries, especially those demanding rigorous logical clarity. The high stakes of doctrinal orthodoxy meant that Sherwood's methods were often invoked in synods and councils, informing the resolution of contentious disputes. His ability to reconcile logical rigor with doctrinal fidelity added a dimension of trust, which further elevated his standing within both religious and philosophical communities. Sherwood's legacy, however, is perhaps best measured by the impact of his ideas on subsequent generations. His supposition theory, in particular, became a linchpin in the subsequent development of medieval logic. Thinkers such as Peter of Spain, John Buridan, and Albert of Saxony adopted and refined Sherwood's categories, using them as springboards for more sophisticated treatises on language, cognition, and epistemology. The Sherwoodian framework for the analysis of terms and propositions contributed directly to the birth of semantics in philosophical discourse. Despite the passage of centuries and the inevitable transformations of intellectual fashion, Sherwood's works continued to be revered by students and scholars alike. His treatises were frequently referenced in disputations, cited in theological treatises, and preserved in manuscript collections. While the rise of new philosophical paradigms during the Renaissance threatened to eclipse medieval logic, the resilience of Sherwood's ideas ensured their survival. Modern historians of philosophy, upon rediscovering his writings, have marveled at their subtlety, originality, and enduring relevance, the enduring legacy of William of Sherwood finds its fullest expression in the ongoing dialogue between past and present. His rigorous pursuit of logical clarity, his careful articulation of complex concepts, and his commitment to educational reform established a model of inquiry that maintains its vitality to this day. Each time a student learns the basics of supposition, or an academic draws upon medieval sources to elucidate the foundations of contemporary logic, the silent influence of Sherwood echoes through the ages. With the advancement of logical theory in the modern era, Sherwood's contributions have acquired renewed significance. The contemporary emphasis on formal systems, symbolic logic, and linguistic analysis owes much to the groundwork laid by medieval thinkers. Sherwood's elucidation of the relationship between terms and propositions prefigured the abstract rigor of later logicians such as Frege and Russell. The very categories he delineated continue to inform research in linguistics, computer science, and philosophy. In summation, William of Sherwood's later years and legacy reveal a thinker whose impact was both immediate and long-lasting. His ability to combine philosophical depth with pedagogical clarity ensured that his writings would endure, while his influence upon generations of scholars guaranteed that medieval logic would retain its place within the broader history of ideas. The story of Sherwood is the story of logic itself, a tale of discovery, refinement, transmission, and unending relevance. As we move through the subsequent chapters, examining the rediscovery of his works and their intersections with modern thought, we will observe the manifold ways in which the legacy of William of Sherwood persists, a reminder that the pursuit of reason and wisdom is itself an eternal endeavor. Chapter 17, Rediscovery of his works in the Renaissance. The Renaissance, often extolled as the age of rebirth and intellectual renewal, offered fertile ground for the re-evaluation and integration of medieval scholarship into burgeoning humanist currents. Amid the epical rediscovery of classical antiquity, the works of William of Sherwood were unearthed, precipitating not only a revival of medieval logic, but also a transformation of its practical and theoretical applications. The convergence of old and new revealed the enduring relevance of Sherwood's treatises and underscored the essential continuity in the evolution of logical thought. The syncretism characteristic of Renaissance scholarship extended beyond ancient Greek and Roman texts. Humanists, in their quest for intellectual synthesis, scoured monastic libraries and university archives, unearthing manuscripts that had languished in obscurity. The introductions in logicum and related treatises by Sherwood attracted particular interest. Scholars recognized their precision, systematic treatment of logical categories, and pedagogical clarity. The challenges of translating and interpreting Aristotle's Organon had not disappeared, and Sherwood's interventions remained crucial for making these foundations accessible to new generations of students. The rediscovery of Sherwood's intellectual legacy during the Renaissance was propelled by a renewed emphasis on grammar, rhetoric, and dialectic, the original trivium of medieval education. Logic, situated as the linchpin of rational argument, provided the scaffolding upon which philosophical, theological, and scientific debates depended. Sherwood's treatises were incorporated into the burgeoning curriculum, harmonizing medieval methodology with emerging humanist ideals. This hybridization produced a pedagogical approach that combined rigorous analysis with stylistic refinement, appealing to scholars across Europe. Notably, the Renaissance revival of logic was not purely antiquarian in spirit. Thinkers such as Lorenzo Valla, Rudolf Agricola, and Juan Luis Vives sought to modernize dialectical techniques by drawing upon medieval sources while infusing them with humanist values. Sherwood's clear articulation of logical terms, his demonstration of the theory of supposition, and his analyses of proposition and inference were recognized as invaluable resources. The careful distinctions he made between different modes of reference and signification, a hallmark of his theory helped to bridge the gap between classical and modern approaches to semantics. The physical preservation and dissemination of Sherwood's writings reflected the transformations wrought by the invention of the printing press. Manuscripts that had previously circulated only among a select cadre of students and academics were suddenly accessible to a much wider audience. The text of Introductions in Logicum was reprinted, annotated, and translated, allowing for greater dissemination and influence. This democratized access stoked an intellectual ferment, inspiring both new scholarship and energetic debate. The resonance of Sherwood's logic extended to the boundaries of emerging scientific inquiry. The Renaissance marked the onset of methodological transformation, with scholars striving to reconcile philosophical principles with empirical observation. Logical rigor, especially in the analysis of syllogistic and propositional structures, became indispensable for the articulation of scientific hypotheses and the interpretation of data. Sherwood's insights provided a foundation for structuring the language and methods of emerging sciences. His categories, distinctions, and rules guided the refinement of analytic procedures, influencing fields as varied as mathematics, astronomy, and natural philosophy. Importantly, the Renaissance did not regard the medieval period as an obstacle to progress. Instead, figures like Sherwood were approached as necessary interlocutors, a bridge connecting the legacy of ancient thought with the critical ambitions of modernity. The intersection of medieval logic with Renaissance humanism marked a creative synthesis, wherein Sherwood's work continued not only to inform argument, but to shape the very contours of reason itself. The continued appreciation of his treatises demonstrated that progress is often built upon the careful retrieval and reimagining of tradition. The rediscovery and re-evaluation of William of Sherwood's contributions during the Renaissance also entailed a transformation in pedagogical philosophy. The didactic methods he championed, dialogue, disputation, and systematic presentation, were revitalized in the context of humanist education. The integration of logic into the broader curriculum was accompanied by a renewed emphasis on critical thinking, intellectual autonomy, and scholarly collaboration. Sherwood's legacy thus moved beyond isolated technical doctrines, serving as a template for holistic education and intellectual formation. In the centuries following the Renaissance, the enduring relevance of Sherwood's ideas became ever clearer. His works continued to be cited, referenced, and taught in the leading universities of Europe. Scholars built upon the logical infrastructure he had constructed, adapting it to the evolving requirements of philosophical, mathematical, and scientific disciplines. The supposition theory he pioneered remains a touchstone for the analysis of reference and meaning, a testament to the resilience and creativity of his thought. In summary, the Renaissance rediscovery of William of Sherwood's works marked a watershed moment in the continuity and transformation of logic. His treatises were recognized not simply as relics of a bygone era, but as living resources for the advancement of knowledge. The complex interplay between medieval tradition and Renaissance innovation ensured that Sherwood's legacy would continue to inform, inspire, and challenge thinkers across the boundaries of time. His writings remain an enduring invitation to the pursuit of clarity, rigor, and the disciplined powers of reason. Chapter 18. Influence on Modern Logic and Philosophy, Tracing. The influence of William of Sherwood on the trajectory of modern logic and philosophy reveals a story of intellectual endurance and transformation. While the technical advances of the 20th century, Hilbert's formal systems, Frege's predicate logic, Tarski's semantics, may seem worlds apart from the medieval classroom, the seeds of systematic reasoning and analytic precision laid by Sherwood occupy a vital place in this lineage. His pioneering theory of supposition, methodological approach to propositions, and commitment to clarity resonate within the deepest structures of contemporary thought. Sherwood's most significant impact lies in the development of semantic theory. His classification of supposition, differentiating personal, simple, and material modes, constituted one of the earliest systematic attempts to address ambiguity and reference within logical language. This distinction prefigures, and in many ways anticipates, the later work of philosophers and logicians such as Gottlob Frege, who famously confronted the challenges of sense and reference. Sherwood's insight was to recognize that the meaning of terms in a proposition depends not merely on their bare lexical form, but on their contextual function and referential intent. Modern logic, with its emphasis on formalization, quantification, and abstraction, finds its medieval precursor in Sherwood's approach to the analysis of propositions. By dissecting the elements of logical discourse, Sherwood laid the intellectual groundwork for the kind of symbolic manipulation central to 20th century logic. The transition from natural language reasoning to formal systems was not abrupt, but rather a gradual evolution, with Sherwood's treatises serving as a bridge. His concern for precision, categorization, and systematic presentation became integral to the development of truth-functional analysis, model theory, and proof theory. The philosophical implications of Sherwood's work extend well beyond technical logic. His exploration of the interplay between language and reality foreshadowed later developments in philosophy of language and epistemology. The notion that the structure and function of language shape our access to truth, meaning, and knowledge became central to the analytic tradition. Philosophers such as Ludwig Wittgenstein, Bertrand Russell, and W.V. Quine grappled with questions similar to those confronted by Sherwood. What is the relationship between words and things? How do logical categories constrain our understanding of reality? Sherwood's supposition theory, though framed within scholastic metaphysics, anticipated these deeper investigations into linguistic philosophy. Mathematics, too, inherited the Sherwoodian legacy. The precise delineation of terms and categorical relationships offered by supposition theory informed the logical foundations of mathematics, especially as the discipline shifted from informal reasoning to rigorous proof. The rise of mathematical logic, set theory, and algebraic systems drew upon the careful distinctions pioneered in medieval logic texts. The structure of quantifiers, the parsing of variables, and the analysis of logical connectives owe much to the tradition inaugurated by Sherwood and his successors. Sherwood's influence on philosophy of science also merits attention. The principles of clarity, systematic organization, and rational disputation that characterize his pedagogical style became hallmarks of scientific method. The formulation of hypotheses, design of experiments, and construction of explanatory models necessitated the kind of disciplined thinking that Sherwood championed. The intersection of logic and empirical inquiry, central to modern science, thus finds its roots in the scholastic reconciliation of abstract reasoning and practical investigation. Of special significance is the role Sherwood played in shaping the educational culture of logic. His treatises became models for instructional clarity, promoting the active engagement of students with logical principles. The tradition of teaching through disputation, debate, and commentary established a mode of learning that persists in modern seminars, tutorials, and philosophical discussions. Sherwood's focus on dialogical inquiry anticipated the interactive ethos of contemporary scholarship, wherein ideas are tested by argument, criticism, and collaborative refinement. The enduring impact of Sherwood's ideas manifests not only in continuity, but also in creative transformation. The challenges he addressed, the ambiguity of terms, the plurality of reference, the relationship between form and function, remain central to ongoing research in logic, linguistics, computer science, and cognitive science. The rise of artificial intelligence, with its emphasis on semantic parsing and logical inference, inherits much from the theoretical infrastructure pioneered by Sherwood and his contemporaries, Critically, the recognition of Sherwood's contribution to modern philosophy and logic involves both historical retrieval and philosophical appreciation. Scholars have come to realize that the evolution of systematic reasoning is not a tale of rupture, but of adaptation and transmission. Sherwood's work, rather than being eclipsed by later advances, provides the scaffolding upon which modern disciplines are constructed. The careful reading of his texts has revealed not only technical ingenuity, but also philosophical depth, a testament to the enduring power of medieval thought. Ultimately, the influence of William of Sherwood on modern logic and philosophy is a story of intellectual interconnectedness. His commitment to clarity, systematic organization, and rigorous reasoning set standards that continue to shape the practices of analysis, argumentation, and inquiry. Whether in the parsing of linguistic meaning, the formulation of mathematical systems, or the articulation of philosophical theories, the echoes of Sherwood's genius remain. By probing the foundations of logic, he helped chart the course of human reason, a legacy that invites both celebration and ongoing exploration. Chapter 19. From Manuscript to Modern Mind. Preserving his ideas. The survival and transmission of William of Sherwood's intellectual heritage is a tale as captivating as the ideas it preserves. In a time when knowledge was precariously contingent upon fragile manuscripts and the memories of scholars, Sherwood's writings managed to traverse centuries, influences, and linguistic boundaries to find resonance in the modern mind. The journey of his works offers a remarkable illustration of the durability and adaptability of profound thought. Sherwood's introductiones in Logicam and other treatises were initially committed to manuscript, a difficult and laborious process, reliant entirely upon the skill and dedication of medieval scribes. These manuscripts, comprised of parchment or vellum, were fragile vessels susceptible to the ravages of time, war, and neglect. Despite these vulnerabilities, Sherwood's logical treatises became widely copied across monastic and academic institutions. Their popularity stemmed not only from the intrinsic quality of his insights, but from their utility in teaching curricula in the nascent universities of Paris and Oxford. Preserving his ideas required more than duplication. Medieval scholars faced the daunting challenges of interpretation, annotation, and translation. Sherwood's works were frequently glossed, elaborate marginalia provided by students and masters alike. These glosses served as bridges between the original Latin and the evolving vernaculars of Europe, facilitating the transmission of his logic to wider audiences. The advent of print technology in the 15th century marked a new epoch in the preservation of medieval thought. Sherwood's ideas, by then robustly disseminated in academic circles, were among those selected for early printed editions. Printers and editors strove to maintain the fidelity of these texts, engaging in heated debates over the accuracy of various manuscript sources. The painstaking editorial processes ensured that Sherwood's treatises were accessible to a growing scholarly community. Yet, preservation was not a passive act. As the intellectual landscape shifted, Sherwood's ideas were actively engaged, critiqued, and sometimes reinterpreted to fit new philosophical paradigms. Renaissance humanists and early modern schoolmen sought to clarify his methods in the context of changing understandings of language, logic, and science. Far from being mere artifacts, Sherwood's logical frameworks were living instruments, amenable to adaptation as intellectual needs evolved. The translation of Sherwood's treatises into various European languages further expanded their reach. Latin, once the exclusive domain of scholarly discourse, gradually gave way to vernacular translations. These adaptations democratized access to logic, extending Sherwood's influence beyond academic cloisters to wider society. In doing so, his ideas became embedded within the very fabric of intellectual culture, shaping modes of reasoning in theology, law, and public discourse. In the 20th and 21st centuries, the preservation and study of Sherwood's ideas entered a new phase. The disciplines of paleography and textual criticism enabled scholars to reconstruct lost or damaged manuscripts, tracing the evolution of individual works through the labyrinth of historical transmission. Digital technologies began to play a crucial role. Manuscripts once confined to dimly lit libraries could be meticulously scanned, indexed, and shared globally. Scholars collaborated across continents, pooling expertise to resolve ambiguities, restore damaged texts, and conduct comparative analyses. Today, Sherwood's legacy enjoys a remarkable vitality. His works are taught in philosophy departments, referenced by logicians, and integrated into digital archives. The journey from medieval parchment to modern mind is a testament to the enduring relevance of his contributions. More than a relic of the past, Sherwood's logic continues to inform the ways in which we think, argue, and solve problems. In preserving his ideas, successive generations of scholars have performed a dual service, safeguarding the historical record and enabling the renewed development of logical thought. The process is ongoing. Sherwood's intellectual heritage remains open to reinterpretation and growth. Every new translation, critical edition, and comparative study adds another layer to the living tradition he inaugurated. Ultimately, the survival of William of Sherwood's logic is an inspiring narrative of resilience. It underscores the importance of collaboration across generations and disciplines. The careful handling of manuscripts, the rigorous scrutiny of textual sources, and the innovative application of technology all exemplify humanity's commitment to preserving its intellectual treasures. Through these efforts, the wisdom of Sherwood not only endures but flourishes, illuminating minds long after the ink on his original manuscripts has faded. Chapter 20. The Eternal Mind. William of Sherwood's enduring impact. The story of William of Sherwood is one of enduring intellectual resonance, a mind whose influence echoes through generations, transcending the limitations of its historical circumstance. Sherwood's enduring impact is evident not only in the persistence of his logical frameworks, but in their continuous adaptation and expansion across diverse fields of inquiry. He stands as a paradigm of intellectual immortality, his thoughts as vital today as when they were first committed to manuscript. The concept of the eternal mind encapsulates Sherwood's lasting significance. Unlike many thinkers whose contributions are circumscribed by the context of their age, Sherwood's logic possesses a striking universality. His supposition theory, for instance, provides insights that are applicable not only to the analysis of medieval texts, but to the parsing of modern-day arguments in philosophy, law, and computer science. The patterns of reason he articulated are woven into the very structure of academic discourse. Historians and philosophers alike acknowledge that Sherwood's intellectual innovations seeded the flowering of later methodologies. His clear demarcation of logical terms and careful handling of inference paved ways for the systematic methodologies of the Enlightenment and scientific revolution. In mathematics, his insistence on clarity and rigor prefigured the axiomatic approaches that would become standard in the 19th and 20th centuries. In linguistics, Sherwood's theories have informed contemporary approaches to semantics, illustrating the relationship between language and logic in ways that remain foundational. Perhaps more importantly, Sherwood's enduring impact is reflected in the ethos of critical inquiry he championed. He saw logic not as a static set of rules, but as an evolving discipline, responsive to new challenges and capable of accommodating change. This adaptability has been central to the development of logic as a field. Modern logicians, whether engaged in symbolic logic, modal logic, or the philosophy of language, continue to draw on Sherwood's spirit of analytical flexibility, a readiness to question, refine, and transcend traditional boundaries. Sherwood's methods also serve as a bridge between disciplines. In theology, his logic provided means to clarify doctrinal disputes and advance the art of disputation. In law, his approaches informed the development of evidential reasoning and judicial argument. Theoretical computer science, a field inconceivable in Sherwood's time, traces its origins in part to the syntax and semantics he helped elucidate. The durability of Sherwood's vision is reinforced by the continuing relevance of his writings. His treatises, now available in translation and digital form, are regularly consulted by scholars and students alike. Conferences, seminars, and publications still examine the nuances of his thought. This phenomenon is not merely the result of historical curiosity, but a recognition that Sherwood's logic offers living tools for the exploration of contemporary problems. The concept of intellectual immortality, exemplified by Sherwood, raises profound questions about the nature of influence and legacy. What enables a thinker's ideas to endure, transcending the contingencies of time, language, and culture? Sherwood's example suggests that true immortality arises when thought engages the most fundamental puzzles of existence, questions of meaning, reference and inference that continue to animate human inquiry. In this sense, Sherwood's mind remains eternal, not because it is unchanging, but precisely because it is dynamic, a framework capable of adaptation, reinterpretation, and growth. His logic serves as an open-ended guide, inviting each new generation to participate in the process of discovery. The versatility of his frameworks ensures that they are not merely preserved, but continually revitalized in response to novel challenges. This continuous revitalization is visible in the emergence of new schools of logic and philosophy. Debates regarding artificial intelligence, cognitive science, and information theory all benefit from Sherwood's legacy. His insistence on precision, his classification of terms, and his subtle grasp of inference. Even as new languages, technologies, and theories emerge, Sherwood's insights retain their pertinence, offering a wellspring of guidance for modern minds. In sum, the enduring impact of William of Sherwood is a testament to the vitality of reasoned inquiry. His mind endures not only in the words of his treatises, but in the intellectual habits and methodologies he inspired. Every act of logical analysis, every reasoned argument, and every pursuit of truth finds in Sherwood a silent partner, a companion whose vision continues to illuminate the path of understanding. If you found this video helpful, inspiring, or entertaining, don't forget to hit that like button. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on future content. Your support means the world. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.